The crimson dust swirled across the barren wasteland, obscuring the horizon in a perpetual haze. Flynn Argus pulled his tattered scarf tighter around his face, squinting against the abrasive particles that seemed determined to find every exposed patch of skin. His weathered backpack, laden with scavenging tools, clinked softly with each step he took across the cracked earth. The relentless wind howled through the skeletal remains of a once magnificent structure looming ahead, another anonymous ruin in a world full of forgotten glory. Flynn preferred it this way, alone, answerable to no one, unburdened by connections that inevitably led to pain. The past had taught him that lesson well enough. 3 years had passed since he'd fled what he once called home, carrying nothing but guilt and the determination never to make the same mistakes again. Better to be a nameless scavenger than to face what he'd left behind. The ruin before him had once been part of the legendary Aldarian Empire, if the ornate, half-crumbled arches were any indication. Not that it mattered to Flynn. History was irrelevant. Only salvageable tech had value in this wasteland. Energy cells, circuit boards, processing chips. These were the treasures that kept a man alive, that could be traded for food and water in the scattered settlements dotting the endless desert. Flynn ducked beneath a fallen beam, descending into the cool darkness of the ancient structure. His practiced eyes adjusted quickly, scanning for the telltale glint of metal or the dull glow of dormant technology. The usual protocol: check corners first, then move inward, avoid central chambers until the perimeter was secure. Too many scavengers had died, rushing for obvious treasures, only to trigger ancient security systems or disturb the savage creatures that often made these ruins their homes. 3 hours of meticulous searching yielded a modest haul: 2 partially intact power cells, a handful of copper wiring, and what appeared to be an undamaged memory crystal, valuable enough to justify the journey. Flynn was securing the items in his pack when something caught his eye, a dull metallic shape protruding from beneath a pile of rubble in a far corner. Curious, he approached cautiously, using his pry bar to shift aside the larger pieces of debris. Beneath the rubble lay what appeared to be nothing more than a piece of scrap metal, an old sword, its blade dulled by rust and time. Flynn almost left it, but something made him pause. Scrap metal had value too, if nothing else. He reached down and brushed away the dust coating the blade. As his fingers made contact with the corroded metal, a faint electric tingle coursed through his hand and up his arm. Flynn froze, wondering if he'd accidentally touched an exposed power conduit. But there was no pain, only a strange, almost pleasant vibration that seemed to resonate through his bones. Then, clear as day, a voice spoke inside his mind. "Welcome back, Your Majesty." Flynn jerked back, dropping the sword with a clatter. He spun around, searching the shadows for whoever had spoken. But he was alone in the chamber, the only sound the distant howling of the wind and his own rapid breathing. "Who's there?" he called, voice echoing among the stone walls. No answer came. Cautiously, he approached the sword again. In the dim light filtering through the collapsed ceiling, he could now see that what he'd mistaken for rust was actually an intricate pattern of symbols etched into the metal. And more strangely still, the blade now emitted a faint, pulsing glow, so subtle he might have imagined it. "I'm losing my mind," Flynn muttered, but still found himself reaching for the sword again. The moment his fingers wrapped around the hilt, the voice returned. "System reactivation in progress. Royal biometric signature confirmed. Aldarian protocol initiated." Flynn nearly dropped the blade again, but found his fingers wouldn't obey. It was as if the sword had somehow fused to his grip, though he felt no restraint when he tried to move his arm. Before he could process what was happening, a new sound reached his ears, the unmistakable shuffle of multiple footsteps approaching the chamber. Flynn cursed under his breath. Dust reavers, wasteland bandits who preyed on lone scavengers, taking their finds and often their lives. "I know you're in there, friend," called a raspy voice. "We saw you enter hours ago. Whatever you found, it's ours now. Come out nice and easy, and maybe we'll let you keep your kneecaps." Flynn gripped the sword tighter, backing toward a shadowed alcove. He was outnumbered and outgunned. The knife at his belt would be useless against the Reaver's makeshift firearms. His only hope was to somehow slip past them in the darkness. As the first Reaver stepped into the chamber, the sword in Flynn's hand suddenly flared with brilliant blue light, illuminating the room with the intensity of a miniature sun. The bandits recoiled, shielding their eyes momentarily blinded. The sword vibrated in Flynn's grip, and before he could react, a pulse of energy erupted from the blade, expanding outward in a concussive wave that knocked the Reavers off their feet, sending them tumbling back into the corridor. "What the hell was that?" one of them shouted, scrambling to his feet. "It's one of those tech weapons." "Get out," another cried. Flynn stood frozen in astonishment as the bandits retreated, their fearful curses echoing through the ruins. The sword's glow dimmed to a subtle shimmer, but Flynn could still feel a current of energy pulsing through the metal into his palm. "What are you?" he whispered to the blade. No answer came this time, but the sword continued its gentle pulsing, as if encouraging him to leave this place. Shaken but alive, Flynn carefully wrapped the strange artifact in a cloth and secured it to his pack. Whatever this thing was, it had saved his life. More importantly, it was clearly valuable. Possibly even ancient tech, the rarest and most sought-after salvage in the wasteland. Part of him wanted to discard it, to leave behind whatever trouble this mysterious blade would surely bring. But another part, the part that had kept him alive in this harsh world, knew that walking away from such a find would be madness. That night, Flynn sat alone by a small fire in the lee of a rock formation, a temporary shelter miles from the ruins. The wrapped sword lay before him, its faint glow visible even through the cloth. The flames cast dancing shadows across his troubled face as he stared at the artifact, questions tumbling through his mind. "What have I gotten myself into?" he murmured, reaching tentatively toward the wrapped blade. Something told him that his life of anonymous scavenging had just come to an end. The wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of dust and decay, and something else, a whisper so faint it might have been imagined. "Destiny, your Majesty." Long delayed, but finally found. Flynn spent the night tossing restlessly, dreams filled with images of soaring spires and armies clashing beneath a strange sky. In every dream, he stood above it all, the glowing sword raised high, while thousands chanted a name he couldn't quite hear. Morning brought no clarity. Flynn unwrapped the sword, turning it over in his hands, searching for some mechanism, some technology that could explain the voice and the energy pulse. The blade appeared almost ordinary in the harsh daylight. A long, slightly curved sword with an ornate hilt that might once have contained precious stones, now empty settings. The etchings along the blade were indeed patterns, not rust as he'd first thought, intricate symbols that seemed to shift and change when he wasn't looking directly at them. "Hello," Flynn said, feeling foolish for talking to an inanimate object. "Anyone in there?" Silence greeted him. The sword remained inert, its glow barely perceptible in the daylight. "Great," Flynn muttered. "Now I'm the crazy person talking to a piece of junk." He attempted to activate the sword as it had done in the ruins, swinging it experimentally, pressing various parts of the hilt, even commanding it verbally. Nothing happened. After an hour of fruitless experimentation, Flynn rewrapped the sword and set off toward Rust Haven, the nearest settlement where he could trade his legitimate salvage. Perhaps someone there would recognize the weapon or at least offer a decent price for it. As he trudged across the wasteland, the voice returned sporadically, disconnected phrases that made little sense. Imperial protocols. Energy reserves at minimal capacity, awaiting full synchronization. Aldaria rises. "What is Aldaria?" Flynn asked after one such episode. "The sovereign kingdom of Aldaria," the voice replied, stronger now. "The realm you ruled before the great collapse. You have returned from the long sleep, your Majesty." "I'm not a king," Flynn insisted. "My name is Flynn Argus. I'm a scavenger. Temporary dissociation is expected after extended suspension. Memory restoration will commence as synchronization progresses." "There's nothing to restore," Flynn argued, then stopped, realizing he was standing alone in the desert, arguing with a voice in his head. "I've finally cracked," he concluded grimly. By midday, Flynn reached Rust Haven, a haphazard collection of structures cobbled together from salvaged materials, huddled around an ancient water purification facility. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, eyeing newcomers with practiced suspicion. Flynn kept his head down as he passed through the gates, the sword securely bundled and inconspicuous among his other salvage. The market square buzzed with the usual activity, traders hawking questionable merchandise, mercenaries lounging in the shadows, waiting for contracts, and scavengers like himself, hoping to turn dangerous work into enough resources to survive another week. Flynn headed straight for his regular buyer, an unscrupulous but fair trader named Maddox who asked few questions about the origin of goods. "Flynn, the ghost returns." Maddox greeted him with a gap-toothed grin. "Show me what the ruins have surrendered this time." Flynn laid out his legitimate finds, the power cells, wiring, and memory crystal, keeping the sword hidden for now. Maddox examined each item with expert eyes, offering a fair price that Flynn accepted with a nod. As Maddox counted out water tokens and preserved food packs, Flynn considered bringing out the sword. But something held him back. Perhaps it was the voice's warnings, or simply instinct honed by years of survival in a world where unique items brought unique dangers. His business concluded, Flynn turned to leave, only to collide with a young woman so engrossed in a handheld scanning device that she hadn't watched her path. The device clattered to the ground, and she dropped to her knees with a curse, frantically checking for damage. "Watch where you're going," she snapped, looking up at Flynn with fierce eyes. She was perhaps in her mid-20s, dark hair pulled back in a practical knot, face smudged with grease or soot. Unlike most wasteland dwellers, she wore what appeared to be modified tech worker coveralls rather than the usual patchwork of scavenged clothing. "You were the one not looking," Flynn pointed out, but still crouched to help her gather scattered tools that had spilled from her satchel. As he handed her a peculiar, multi-pronged instrument, her scanner suddenly emitted a series of rapid beeps. Her eyes widened as she glanced from the device to Flynn's pack, where the wrapped sword protruded slightly. "Where did you get that?" she asked, voice hushed. Flynn instinctively stepped back. "Get what?" "Don't play dumb," she said, rising to her feet. "Your pack. It's emitting an Aldarian energy signature. I've spent years studying those frequencies." Flynn tensed, ready to run. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "That's not just salvage. It's Aldarian royal tech. Highly illegal in most settlements, and extremely dangerous in the wrong hands." She glanced around nervously. "Including these hands right here. I'm Kalia, by the way." "Flynn," he replied automatically, then cursed himself for giving his real name. "And it's just a piece of old metal. Nothing special." Kalia's expression shifted to one of academic interest. "If it's nothing special, you won't mind if I take a closer look?" Before Flynn could refuse, a commotion at the market entrance caught their attention. A group of black-clad figures moved methodically through the crowd, stopping traders and examining their wares. Each wore a stylized emblem on their chest, a golden crown pierced by a sword. "The order," Kalia whispered, grabbing Flynn's arm with surprising strength. "They're looking for something, or someone." She fixed him with an intense stare. "That sword isn't just a trinket, is it? It spoke to you." Flynn stared at her in shock. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because that sword isn't just some relic. It's the Aldarian sovereign blade, said to contain the consciousness of the ancient rulers, and it only activates for those with royal blood." Her eyes narrowed. "Which makes you either extremely valuable or incredibly dangerous." Flynn's denial died on his lips as one of the black-clad figures pointed in their direction. "We need to leave. Now," Kalia urged. "Why should I trust you?" Flynn demanded, even as he began backing toward a side alley. "Because right now, I'm not trying to dissect you to find out why an ancient artifact thinks you're royalty," she countered. "But they will." The decision made itself as the Order members began moving purposefully toward them. Flynn nodded once, and together they slipped into the narrow alley, the first step in what would become a desperate flight from Rust Haven. As they hurried through the winding back passages, Flynn felt the sword grow warm against his back, and the voice returned. Danger. Imperial protections engaging. Not now, Flynn hissed, but it was too late. A soft blue glow began to emanate from his pack, illuminating the dim alley. The sword's active? Kalia gasped. Here? Are you controlling it? Does it look like I'm controlling it? Flynn snapped, tried to adjust his pack to hide the glow. Halt in the name of the Order! A voice commanded from behind them. Instead, they ran, bursting out of the alley onto a wider street. Flynn glanced back to see two black-clad pursuers gaining ground, devices in their hands that looked decidedly more advanced than typical wasteland technology. This way, Kalia pulled him toward a rusted door set in a corrugated metal wall. She punched a code into a hidden panel, and the door slid open with a pneumatic hiss. My workshop. We can lose them here. Flynn hesitated for just a moment before following her inside. The door sealed behind. Then with a reassuring clank of multiple locks engaging. The interior was a stark contrast to the ramshackle exterior. A surprisingly organized space filled with workbenches, diagnostic equipment, and half-assembled devices Flynn couldn't begin to identify. One wall was covered entirely in diagrams, maps, and ancient script that resembled the etchings on the sword. What is this place? Flynn asked, breathing heavily from their sprint. My research facility, Kalia replied, moving quickly to a console and typing commands. Screens flickered to life, displaying security camera feeds of the street outside. I'm an archaeotechnician. I study ancient tech, particularly Aldarian artifacts. You're not just a scavenger. Neither are you, apparently, she countered, eyeing his pack. May I? She gestured toward the sword. Flynn hesitated, then slowly removed the wrapped bundle and laid it on a nearby workbench. It has a mind of its own. I can't control it. That's because you haven't synchronized with it properly, Kalia said, approaching the sword with reverent caution. The legends say the sovereign blade contains the combined wisdom of all previous Aldarian rulers, accessible only to those of the royal bloodline. Flynn unwrapped the sword, and immediately the blade's glow intensified, casting eerie blue patterns across the workshop walls. Kalia gasped, eyes wide with academic excitement. The patterns, she whispered, they match the prophecy inscriptions in the ancient texts. She pointed to the wall of diagrams. See these symbols? They speak of the return of the last Aldarian heir after the long winter of the soul. That sword isn't just a weapon, Flynn. It's the key to Aldaria's resurrection. Flynn's discomfort grew. I'm not an heir to anything. I'm no one. The sword disagrees, Kalia noted, gesturing to the now brightly glowing blade. And so does the Order. They've been searching for the sovereign blade for decades, claiming only they can restore the glory of Aldaria. Her expression darkened. But their version of glory involves subjugating everyone who doesn't fit their vision of a pure Aldarian society. This is insane, Flynn muttered, but even as he spoke, the voice returned, stronger than before. Heir of Aldaria, the time of awakening approaches. The Sky Citadel awaits its ruler's return. Flynn's vision suddenly blurred, overtaken by vivid images not his own. A magnificent city of impossible towers floating above the clouds, shimmering with golden light. Himself, or someone who looked like him, standing on a balcony overlooking thousands of cheering subjects, wearing gleaming golden armor, the sword blazing in his hand. He came back to reality with a gasp, finding himself on his knees, the sword clutched in a white-knuckled grip. Kalia knelt beside him, concern evident in her eyes. You saw something, she stated, not a question. Flynn nodded shakily. A city, in the sky, people calling me, something I couldn't understand. The Sky Citadel of Aldaria, Kalia breathed. It was their greatest achievement, an entire city sustained by technology so advanced it seemed like magic to outsiders. It vanished during the collapse. Most believe it was destroyed, but some theories suggest it was hidden, suspended in some kind of stasis field, waiting for the return of the rightful ruler. A thunderous pounding on the workshop door interrupted them. By order of the High Inquisitor, surrender the Aldarian artifact and the pretender, a voice commanded. "We need to go," Kalia said urgently, already gathering items into a pack. "My transport is in the back. We need to reach the archives before they do." "What archives?" Flynn asked, rewrapping the sword with trembling hands. "The Aldarian repository. It's an information vault hidden in the mountains to the east. If we can access it, we might learn why the sword chose you and how to control its power." She tossed him a small device. "Emergency beacon. If we get separated, activate it. I'll find you." The pounding intensified, the door beginning to buckle under some unseen force. Flynn made his decision, slinging the sword across his back. "Lead the way." They escaped through a hidden passage just as the workshop door burst open, emerging into the harsh sunlight and rushing toward a covered vehicle that resembled a patchwork of ancient and modern technology. As Kalia fired up the engines, Flynn looked back to see black-clad figures pouring into the street, devices raised. "Hold on," Kalia shouted, and the vehicle lurched forward, weaving through the narrow streets of Rust Haven toward the open wasteland beyond. As they cleared the settlement perimeter, Flynn felt a weight lift from his chest, replaced by a strange, unfamiliar sensation: anticipation. For 3 years, he'd been running from his past. Now, inexplicably, he found himself racing toward a future he couldn't begin to comprehend, guided by a glowing sword and a woman he'd just met. "Your Majesty," the sword's voice echoed in his mind. "The journey of restoration has begun." Whether he wanted it or not, Flynn Argus, scavenger, fugitive, nobody, was now a key player in a game centuries in the making. And somewhere deep inside, a part of him he'd long buried stirred to life, wondering if perhaps this madness might lead to a redemption he'd stopped believing was possible. The journey to the Aldarian repository took 3 grueling days across the hostile wasteland. Flynn and Kalia traveled by night and hid during the scorching daylight hours, always vigilant for signs of pursuit. The sword remained dormant most of the time, but occasionally flared to life, offering cryptic guidance or warnings of danger seconds before it appeared. On the second night, as they huddled in the shelter of a fallen obelisk, Flynn's dreams were more vivid than ever. He saw the floating city in greater detail, its crystalline spires, the throngs of people in strange attire, the advanced vehicles that moved without touching ground. But most disturbing were the scenes where he, or someone wearing his face, sat upon a throne of gleaming metal, passing judgments and commanding armies with casual authority. He awoke with a start, the sword glowing softly beside him. Kalia, taking the first watch, noticed his distress. "Another vision?" she asked quietly. Flynn nodded, rubbing his face. "I keep seeing myself as some kind of ruler, but it doesn't feel right. In the dream, I'm cruel, distant, like the lives of others mean nothing." Kalia considered this. The historical records suggest the last Aldarian emperor was indeed tyrannical. Perhaps what you're seeing aren't visions of your future, but memories of your ancestor. "I'm not related to any emperor," Flynn insisted, but with less conviction than before. "The sword wouldn't have chosen you without reason," Kalia replied. "But that doesn't mean you're destined to repeat history. Perhaps that's why you've been chosen now, to forge a different path." Flynn stared into the darkness. "What if I don't want this path at all? Would you prefer the Order find the sword instead? Imagine that power in the hands of zealots who believe genocide is an acceptable way to purify the wasteland." She paused. "I understand being afraid of power, Flynn, but refusing to wield it doesn't mean it ceases to exist. It just means someone else will use it, possibly for worse ends." Her words haunted Flynn through the remainder of the night and into the following day. As they neared the mountain range that allegedly housed the repository, he noticed a troubling development. The further they traveled from Rust Haven, the weaker he felt, headaches blossoming behind his eyes, a strange hollowness growing in his chest. "I think the sword is affecting me physically," he admitted as they made camp on the third night. "When it's inactive for too long, I feel drained." Kalia examined him with concern. The synchronization might be progressing. According to the legends, the Sovereign Blade eventually becomes an extension of the ruler's life force, strengthening them when active, but creating dependency over time. So, I'm becoming addicted to a sword? Flynn asked incredulously. More like, it's becoming part of you, Kalia corrected. The ancient texts describe it as a symbiosis, not merely a tool and user. Flynn unsheathed the blade and immediately felt relief wash over him as it began to glow. That can't be healthy. Power rarely is, Kalia agreed. But we're almost there. The repository should contain information on how the old rulers managed the connection. By dawn of the fourth day, they reached the base of a particularly rugged mountain. Nothing distinguished it from the countless other peaks surrounding them, but Kalia approached a seemingly solid rock face with confidence, consulting her scanning device. The entrance should be right. Here, she muttered, pressing her palm against the stone. To Flynn's amazement, a section of rock shimmered and then became transparent, revealing a narrow passage leading into darkness. Holographic camouflage, Kalia explained, still functioning after all these centuries. As they stepped into the passage, lights flickered to life automatically, illuminating a descending corridor carved from the living rock. The walls were inscribed with the same symbols as the sword, glowing faintly as they passed. The repository was designed to survive even total planetary catastrophe, Kalia explained, her voice hushed with reverence. It contains the complete knowledge of the Aldarian civilization, their history, technology, culture. Only those with authorized access could enter. Then how are we walking in? Flynn asked. Kalia glanced meaningfully at the sword on his back, which had begun to pulse with increasing intensity. You're carrying the ultimate authorization. The passage opened into a vast chamber that took Flynn's breath away. Seemingly endless rows of crystalline columns stretched into the shadows, each emitting a soft, multicolored glow. The ceiling arched high above, decorated with a map of stars and configurations Flynn didn't recognize. At the center of the chamber stood a raised dais with what appeared to be a control console. As they approached the dais, the sword suddenly pulled free from its makeshift sheath, floating of its own accord to hover above the console. Flynn reached for it instinctively, but Kalia held him back. Wait, she whispered. I think it's interfacing with the system. The sword rotated slowly, its glow intensifying until it was painful to look at directly. Then, with a sound like a rushing wind, the light expanded outward, coalescing into a humanoid figure standing before the console. An elderly man in ornate robes, his form translucent and flickering. Greetings, seekers, the figure intoned, its voice echoing with the same quality as the sword's. I am Oracle Unit 7, custodian of the Aldarian repository. State your purpose and authorization. Before Flynn could respond, the sword pulsed, sending a beam of light that enveloped him briefly. The hologram's expression shifted from neutrality to astonishment. Impossible, it whispered. Genetic verification confirms. You are the bloodline, the last scion of Aldaria. The figure bowed deeply. Your Highness, the repository awaits your command. Flynn stood frozen, the confirmation of what Kalia had suspected hitting him like a physical blow. There must be a mistake, he managed finally. I'm not royalty. My parents were wasteland nomads. Your immediate ancestry is irrelevant, the Oracle stated. The Sovereign Blade responds only to those carrying the genetic marker of the Aldarian royal house, a marker impossible to falsify or replicate. You are, by blood right, the heir to the throne of Aldaria, regardless of your upbringing. Kalia stepped forward. Oracle, can you tell us what happened to Aldaria? Why did it fall? The hologram's expression darkened. The fall of Aldaria came from within and without. Emperor Valerian XI grew, increasingly paranoid and tyrannical, alienating allied nations and brutalizing his own people. When the outsiders came with their superior weaponry, many who might have defended the empire instead chose to join the invaders. Images appeared in the air around them, scenes of a magnificent civilization in flames, advanced weapons firing upon golden towers, the floating city listing dangerously as explosions bloomed across its surface. In the final days, as the sky citadel began to fall, The Emperor's own council attempted to wrest control from him, believing his madness would doom them all. In the chaos, the young crown prince disappeared, whether killed, captured, or hidden for protection. Even I cannot say with certainty. Flynn watched the scenes of destruction with a growing sense of dread. And the sword? What is it exactly? The Sovereign Blade is the most advanced creation of Aldarian science, a repository of royal consciousness, a weapon of immense power, and the key to all Aldarian technology, the Oracle explained. It was programmed to remain dormant until it detected a viable heir, at which point it would guide that heir to reclaim their birthright. There have been others who claim to be the heir, Kalia noted. The Order has sought the sword for generations. Many have claimed the title, the Oracle agreed. All have been pretenders. The blade does not recognize bloodlines diluted beyond a certain threshold, nor does it acknowledge claim by conquest or decree. Only direct descent from the main royal line activates its primary functions. Flynn ran a hand through his hair, overwhelmed. So what am I supposed to do with this information? Rebuild a fallen empire? Become some kind of king? That is your choice, your highness, the Oracle replied. The blade has chosen you, but how you wield its power is not predetermined. I can only offer knowledge of what was, not dictate what should be. Kalia turned to Flynn, excitement evident in her eyes. Don't you see what this means? With the knowledge in this repository and the power of the Sovereign Blade, we could transform the wasteland, restore technology, rebuild civilization, unite the scattered settlements. Flynn wasn't sharing her enthusiasm. Or I could become like the Emperor in my visions, cruel, power-mad, starting the cycle all over again. The oracles seem to consider this. There is wisdom in your caution, young heir. The power to rebuild also contains the power to dominate. This was the failure of the last emperor. He forgot that a ruler exists to serve, not to command. A sudden alarm blared through the chamber, red lights pulsing along the crystalline columns. The oracle's expression became urgent. Warning, unknown entities have breached the outer security perimeter. Hostile intent detected. The order, Kalia, gasped. They must have followed us somehow. How much time do we have? Flynn demanded. Minutes only, the oracle responded. The repository's defenses are ancient and have deteriorated over the centuries. Flynn made a quick decision. Oracle, is there another way out of here? There is an emergency evacuation tunnel leading to the eastern slopes. However, I must warn you, removal of the Sovereign Blade from the repository during an active security alert will trigger the Emergency Data Preservation Protocol. Meaning what? Flynn asked urgently. All accessible data will be downloaded directly into the blade for safekeeping, creating a temporary but significant power surge. The process is not without risk to the bearer. Flynn glanced at Kalia, who nodded grimly. Do it. We can't let the order get the sword or the data. Initiating emergency protocol, the oracle announced. A section of wall slid open, revealing a narrow passage. This will lead you to safety. I will delay the intruders as long as possible. Thank you, Flynn said, surprised by the emotion in his voice. It has been my honor to serve the royal house once more, the oracle replied, its form already beginning to fade. Remember, young heir, Aldaria was more than its technology or its power. It was once a beacon of knowledge and progress. Its fall began when it forgot the people it was meant to serve. With those words, the hologram disappeared. The sword, still hovering above the console, suddenly shot toward Flynn, who instinctively raised his hand to catch it. The moment his fingers closed around the hilt, excruciating pain blazed through his entire body. It felt as if his veins had been filled with molten metal, his mind expanding beyond its limits to accommodate an influx of information too vast for human comprehension. Kalia caught him as he staggered, half dragging him toward the escape tunnel as the sounds of combat echoed from the main entrance. Energy weapons firing, shouts of command, the crash of ancient defense systems engaging. Stay with me, Flynn, Kalia urged as they stumbled down the narrow passage. Focus on my voice. Don't get lost in the data stream. Flynn fought to remain conscious, each step a battle against the overwhelming flood of images, knowledge, and memories pouring into his mind from a sword. Generations of rulers, centuries of history, technological specifications beyond his comprehension, all competing for space in his overwhelmed consciousness. They emerged onto a rocky ledge just as a massive explosion rocked the mountain behind them. The repository entrance had been breached. Without pausing to rest, they scrambled down the treacherous slope, using the minimal cover provided by scattered boulders and scraggly vegetation. By nightfall, they had put several miles between themselves and the repository, finding shelter in a narrow ravine. Flynn collapsed against a rock wall, the sword still clutched in his hand, its glow fluctuating wildly. The data transfer had stabilized, but left him physically drained and mentally disoriented, the boundaries between his own memories and those from the sword becoming increasingly blurred. "Flynn, are you still with me?" Kalia asked, her face lined with worry as she pressed a water container to his lips. He managed a weak nod. "It's overwhelming. I can see the sky's citadel as it was being built. I can name every ruler of Aldaria back 20 generations. I know how to operate technology that hasn't existed for centuries." He looked at her with haunted eyes, and I can feel their ambitions, their pride, their conviction that they alone deserved to rule. Kalia sat beside him, her expression solemn. "You're not them, Flynn. You have their knowledge, but not their flaws." "Don't I?" he asked bitterly. "You don't know who I was before the wasteland, what I did that forced me to flee my home." "Then tell me," she said simply. Flynn was silent for a long moment, the sword's glow reflecting in his tired eyes. "I was a settlement enforcer, security for a community in the Northern Territories. I believed in order and rules. When raiders threatened us, I led the defense." His voice grew distant. "We won easily. The attackers were desperate and poorly equipped. Their leader surrendered, begged for mercy. Kalia watched him, saying nothing. I executed him, made an example." Flynn's voice was hollow now. "Then I ordered the same for any raider over 15 years old. 18 people. Some fighters, some just desperate people looking for food and medicine." He looked down at his hands. "I told myself it was justice, that I was protecting my people. The settlement leaders agreed, called me a hero." His voice cracked slightly. "But that night, I saw the faces of the younger ones, children now orphaned, watching as I murdered their parents. One girl, maybe 12, looked at me with such hatred. I knew then what I'd become." "What happened to them? The children?" Kalia asked softly. "The settlement took them in. I couldn't bear to stay, to see those eyes watching me every day. So I left, became a scavenger, someone no one would notice or remember." He laughed bitterly. "And now this sword thinks I should be a king." Kalia was quiet for a long moment. "Perhaps that's exactly why it chose you," she said finally. "You understand the weight of power, the cost of wielding it wrongly. You've seen both sides." Flynn shook his head. "Or I'm just as power-hungry and merciless as the Emperor in my visions, and this is where it starts." "The difference," Kalia said carefully, "is that he never questioned himself. You do." She nodded toward the sword. "What matters isn't where power comes from, but how you choose to use it." Before Flynn could respond, the emergency beacon in Kalia's pack began to emit a series of rapid beeps. "Someone's activated my workshop's perimeter alert," she said, checking the device. "Friendly signal. It must be Soren." "Who's Soren?" Flynn asked warily. "An ally. Former Dust Reaver who saw the light after the Order massacred his clan for harboring technological heretics. He watches my workshop when I'm away." She adjusted the beacon's settings. "I'm sending a response with coordinates to meet. We'll need help if we're going to stay ahead of the Order." Dawn found them moving again, following a dried riverbed that offered some cover from aerial observation. Flynn's strength was returning gradually, though the sword continued to pulse with occasional downloads of information, each one sending momentary disorientation through his mind. By midday, they spotted a plume of dust on the horizon, a single vehicle approaching rapidly. Kalia signaled with a reflective panel, and the vehicle adjusted course directly toward them. That's Soren, she confirmed, relief evident in her voice. The vehicle that skidded to a halt before them was a modified wasteland runner, a patchwork of ancient and salvage technology built for speed rather than comfort. Its driver was a weathered man in his 40s, with a cybernetic eye implant and arms covered in tribal markings. "Cutting it close, aren't you?" he called to Kalia as he jumped down for the driver's seat. "Half the order is combing the wasteland for you two." "Soren, this is Flynn," Kalia introduced them. "Flynn, Soren was my first guide when I started researching Aldarian ruins." Soren gave Flynn an appraising look, his cybernetic eye whirring softly as it focused. "So you're the one causing all the fuss." His gaze dropped to the sword at Flynn's hip. "Genuine article, I see. No wonder the order's gone, full zealot. What's happening back at Rust Haven?" Kalia asked. Soren's expression darkened. "The order's declared martial law, calling it a state of divine emergency. They're requisitioning resources, recruiting enforcers, preaching about the coming purification now that the Sovereign Blade has been found." He looked grimly at Flynn. "According to their new proclamation, anyone harboring the false pretender will face immediate execution." "They haven't wasted any time," Flynn muttered. "It gets worse," Soren continued. "High Inquisitor Sira himself has taken command of the operation. Word is he's mobilized their entire armed contingent from the Central Enclave." Flynn recognized the name from fragmentary data received from the repository. Sira claims direct descent from Emperor Valorian's trusted general. A claim the sword obviously rejected, Kalia noted. "Which only makes it more dangerous," Soren replied. "Climb in. We need to reach the sanctuary before nightfall." The sanctuary turned out to be an ancient Aldarian observation post built into a mountainside, its existence known only to a small group of wasteland nomads who had preserved scraps of the old knowledge through oral tradition. As they approached, Flynn saw figures emerging from concealed positions, sentries armed with a mixture of salvage tech and handmade weapons. "Nomad clans," Soren explained, noting Flynn's tension. "Most have suffered under the Order's cleansing operations. They've been monitoring Aldarian sites for generations, keeping the locations secret from those who would misuse them. Inside the observation post, they found a thriving community. What from outside appeared to be a minor ruin was revealed as an extensive complex, partially powered by ancient generators and expanded over centuries by those seeking refuge from the wasteland harshness. Children played in corridors lined with hydroponics gardens. Elders worked at restoring damaged technological artifacts, and warriors trained in large chambers repurposed as combat arenas. They were led to a central meeting hall where clan leaders had gathered, alerted to their arrival. Flynn felt their eyes upon him, evaluating, judging, many with open hostility. "These are the representatives of the free clans," Soren announced. "They've agreed to hear your story before, deciding whether to offer sanctuary." For the next hour, Flynn recounted everything that had happened since finding the sword, with Kalia adding details about the repository and the information they'd gathered. As he spoke, the sword at his hip pulsed occasionally, as if emphasizing certain points. When they finished, a long silence fell over the assembly. Finally, an elderly woman with intricate facial tattoos spoke. "The prophecies speak of both restoration and destruction when the heir returns," she said, her voice carrying surprising strength. "How do we know you are not the harbinger of our final end, rather than our salvation?" Flynn met her gaze steadily. "I don't claim to be either. I didn't ask for this sword or the burden it brings. Yet you carry it still," another leader pointed out. "You could have discarded it, fled to the far wastes, and left it for the Order to find." Flynn countered. "I've seen what they would do with such power." The elderly woman nodded slowly. "A wise answer. But intention is not enough against the forces Sira commands. Even now, he gathers an army, not just of Order zealots, but mercenaries and coerced settlement militias. Our scouts report they are systematically searching every known Aldarian site. They seek the Sky Citadel," Kalia realized. "With the sword and the data from the repository, they believe they can reactivate it. And they can," Flynn confirmed grimly, touching the sword. "The knowledge is here," Coordinates, access protocols, reactivation sequences. The Sky Citadel wasn't destroyed. It was placed in temporal stasis, anchored in a dimensional pocket as a last resort to preserve Aldarian civilization's heart. This revelation caused a stir among the assembly. The elderly woman leaned forward. You could access this power? Restore the Citadel? Flynn nodded reluctantly. In theory, the sword contains the command sequences, and my bloodline would allow me to initiate the restoration protocol. Then why do we hide? A younger clan leader demanded. With such a weapon, we could destroy the Order, reclaim the wasteland. Murmurs of agreement rose from several quarters, but Flynn raised his hand for silence. Because that thinking is precisely what doomed Aldaria in the first place, he said quietly. The repository showed me the truth. Aldaria fell not just from external attack, but from within. The Emperor's obsession with power and control alienated allies, oppressed citizens, until many preferred invasion to his continued rule. The sword at his hip flared suddenly, projecting a holographic image into the center of the hall. The final moments of Emperor Valerian, raging on his throne as the Sky Citadel burned around him, ordering the death of his own people rather than surrender. The assembly watched in stunned silence as the Mad Emperor's final command was shown, the activation of the stasis field, trapping himself and thousands of loyal subjects in temporal suspension rather than accept defeat. As the projection faded, Flynn continued solemnly. I don't want a throne or an empire, but I can't allow the knowledge in this sword to fall into hands that would repeat these mistakes. The elderly woman studied him thoughtfully. What do you propose, then, bearer of the blade? Flynn exchanged glances with Kalia before answering. We locate the Sky Citadel's anchor point, not to restore it as it was, but to access its defensive capabilities, to create a sanctuary for all people of the wasteland, not just those deemed worthy by self-appointed rulers. Debate erupted among the clan leaders, some arguing for immediate action, others for caution. As discussions grew heated, scouts burst into the hall. Order forces approaching. Multiple vehicles, heavy weapons, less than an hour away. Chaos descended as warriors rushed to defensive positions and families began gathering essentials for evacuation. Flynn found himself separated from Kalia in the confusion, pushed toward a planning room where Soren and several clan leaders were hastily outlining defense strategies. How did they find us so quickly? A clan leader demanded. Trackers, Soren guessed grimly. Either on your vehicle or... He gave Flynn a pointed look. Realization dawned. The sword, Flynn said. Its energy signature must be detectable with the right equipment. Then you need to leave, a warrior woman stated flatly. Draw them away while our people evacuate. No, Flynn countered. That's exactly what Cira wants. To isolate me, capture the sword. We need to make a stand, here and now, with whatever advantages this place offers. Soren nodded reluctantly. The observation post has ancient defense systems. Most are degraded, but some might be reactivable, especially with the sword's interface. Flynn closed his eyes, concentrating on the repository of knowledge within Blade. Images flashed through his mind. Schematics, access codes, emergency protocols for Aldarian. Military outposts. There's a subsystem, he said, opening his eyes. Automated sentinels. Combat drones powered by the same energy source as the sword. If they're still intact in the lower levels. I know where they would be stored, an elder offered. But they haven't functioned in generations. They will for him, Kalia said, appearing in the doorway. If they respond to the same royal authorization as the repository systems. The next 40 minutes passed in a flurry of activity. While most of the sanctuary's inhabitants prepared to evacuate through hidden tunnels, Flynn, Kalia, and a small team descended into the lowest levels of the complex. There they found a sealed chamber marked with Aldarian royal insignia. Flynn placed the sword against the sealed door, and for the first time since acquiring it, consciously attempted to direct its energy. Open, he commanded, focusing his will through the blade. The sword flared brilliantly, and the ancient door slid aside with a groan of protesting metal. Beyond lay rows of humanoid figures, sleek, metallic combat drones standing in silent formation, their surfaces dulled by centuries of inactivity. "Sentinels of Aldaria," Flynn called out, raising the sword. "Your sovereign commands you to awaken and defend." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, one by one, lights flickered to life across the dormant machines. Metal bodies straightened, ancient joints whirring as systems reactivated. Flynn felt the sword drawing energy from him, creating a connection between himself and the awakening sentinels. "They're responding," Kali'ah whispered in awe. The first sentinel stepped forward, its featureless head inclining in a gesture of obeisance. Command authority recognized. Aldarian defensive protocols initiated. Awaiting deployment orders, sovereign. Flynn swallowed hard, the weight of centuries pressing upon him. Defend the inhabitants of this sanctuary against the approaching order forces. Prioritize minimal casualties on all sides. These are not invaders to be annihilated, but misguided subjects to be contained. The sentinel acknowledged the command with a precise nod, then turned to organize its fellows. Within minutes, 30 fully activated combat drones marched in formation toward the upper levels, ready to engage the approaching enemy. As Flynn and the others returned to the surface, they found a grim scene of preparation. Those too young, old, or infirm to fight had been evacuated through the emergency tunnels, while those remaining had established defensive positions around the sanctuary's perimeter. From an observation platform, Flynn watched the approaching dust cloud of order vehicles, a formidable force of armored transports and weapon platforms, easily outnumbering the sanctuary's defenders. At his side, the sword pulsed with increasing intensity, responding to his rising tension. "This won't be enough," he muttered, eyeing the meager defenses and the small contingent of sentinels. "Even with the drones, we're outnumbered and outgunned." Kali'ah touched his arm. "It's not about winning a conventional battle. We just need to hold them long enough for the evacuation to complete, then follow." Flynn shook his head. "Sira won't stop. He'll hunt down every evacuee, burn through the wasteland until he finds me and the sword." He stared at the approaching army, a decision crystallizing in his mind. "There's another way." Before Kali'ah could question him, Flynn strode to the center of the observation platform, drawing all eyes to him. He raised the sword high, its blade now blazing with blue-white energy that cast harsh shadows across his determined face. "I need volunteers," he announced. "Warriors willing to make a direct strike against Sira himself, while the sentinels engaged the main force." Soren stepped forward immediately. "You have a plan?" Flynn nodded grimly. "Sira wants the sword and the air. I'll give him exactly that, on my terms." The battle began at sunset, order forces establishing a perimeter around the sanctuary and deploying heavy weapons to breach its ancient walls. What they hadn't anticipated was the sudden emergence of Aldarian sentinels from concealed positions, advanced combat, drones moving with lethal precision to disable weapon platforms and immobilize transport vehicles. In the confusion of the initial engagement, a small, swift vehicle burst from a hidden exit on the sanctuary's far side. Aboard were Flynn, Kali'ah, Soren, and 3 nomad warriors, racing directly toward the Order's command position, where High Inquisitor Sira directed the assault from behind multiple layers of protection. "They've spotted us," Soren called from the driver's position, swerving to avoid energy blasts from Order gunners. "Keep going," Flynn ordered, the sword blazing in his grip. Straight for the command vehicle. As they closed the distance, the sword's energy flowed through Flynn with increasing potency. He felt the boundaries between himself and the ancient weapon blurring, knowledge and power surging through his consciousness. For a moment, he glimpsed the pattern of the entire battlefield from above. Energy signatures, tactical positions, the web of command and control linking the Order forces. With newfound clarity, he raised the sword and released a focused pulse of energy that disabled the weapons of the guards surrounding Sira's command center. Their vehicle screeched to a halt before the imposing command transport, a converted Aldarian carrier modified with Order insignia and religious iconography. Flynn stepped out alone, the sword blazing like a star in his hand. "Sira," he called, "face me directly. No more hiding behind your soldiers." The command vehicle's hatch opened slowly, and a tall figure emerged. High Inquisitor Sira was not as Flynn had imagined. Not a wild-eyed zealot, but a composed, aristocratic man whose features bore an unsettling resemblance to the ancient emperors Flynn had seen in his visions. He wore elaborate robes emblazoned with modified Aldarian symbols, and his eyes fixed immediately on the sword with naked hunger. "The pretender reveals himself," Sira announced, his voice carrying unnaturally across the battlefield. "Come to surrender the sacred relic to its rightful custodian?" "I've come to end this," Flynn replied, advancing steadily. "Too many have suffered for Aldarian pride already." Sira descended from his vehicle, flanked by black-clad guards who trained advanced weapons on Flynn. "You understand nothing of Aldaria's greatness. Our ancestors created wonders beyond imagination, ruled with divine right. The wasteland exists because inferior peoples could not bear to see such perfection." "I've seen the truth in the repository," Flynn countered. "Aldaria fell because its rulers forgot their purpose, to serve their people, not dominate them." "Lies!" Sira snarled, his composure cracking. "The repository was corrupted by traitors. Only the Order preserves the true vision of Aldarian glory." He gestured sharply, and his guards raised their weapons. "Surrender the blade, pretender, or die where you stand." Flynn stopped, the sword still raised. "You claim Aldarian blood. Sira, let the blade itself judge who is worthy." He held the sword horizontally before him. "If you are the rightful heir, take it." Sira's eyes widened, momentary uncertainty crossing his features before triumph replaced it. "At last, you accept the inevitable." He strode forward confidently, reaching for the sword with reverent hands. The moment Sira's fingers touched the blade, a blinding flash erupted between them. Sira screamed, staggering backward, his hands smoking and blistered. The sword's energy surged violently, rejecting his touch with unmistakable finality. "Impossible." Sira gasped, clutching his burned hands. "My lineage is pure, descended from Valorian's most trusted general. The sword recognizes only direct royal blood," Flynn stated, the weapon now calm in his grip. "Not collateral lines or self-proclaimed heirs." Rage contorted Sira's aristocratic features. "Kill him," he shrieked to his guards. "Bring me the blade." As the guards raised their weapons, Flynn channeled his will through the sword, creating a protective energy field that deflected the first volley of energy blasts. Simultaneously, Kalia, Soren, and the nomad warriors emerged from their vehicle, engaging the Order forces in close combat. Chaos erupted around the command center as the battle intensified. Flynn found himself facing Sira directly, the High Inquisitor drawing an ornate energy weapon that crackled with modified Aldarian technology. "If I cannot wield the blade, no one shall." Sira raged, firing a concentrated energy blast directly at Flynn. Flynn instinctively raised the sword, which absorbed the energy of the blast and channeled it back towards Sira in a focused beam. The High Inquisitor dove aside, but not quickly enough. The redirected energy caught him in the shoulder, spinning him to the ground with a cry of pain. Before Flynn could press his advantage, he heard Kalia's shout of warning. Turning, he saw an Order zealot taking aim at her with a heavy energy cannon. Without thinking, Flynn hurled himself toward her, the sword extended to intercept the blast. The world exploded in pain and light. Flynn felt himself lifted off his feet, thrown backward by the force of the impact. He landed hard, the breath knocked from his lungs, the sword still clutched in his numbing fingers. Through blurred vision, he saw Kala kneeling over him, her face twisted with concern. "Flynn, stay with me." He tried to respond, but no sound emerged. His body felt distant, disconnected, even as the sword pulsed frantically against his palm. Beyond Kalia, he could see the battle continuing. Soren and the nomad warriors fighting desperately against overwhelming odds, Order reinforcements converging on their position. "We have to retreat." Kalia was saying, attempting to help him stand. The evacuation is complete. We've done enough. Flynn shook his head weakly. No, not enough. Sira will pursue. As if summoned by his name, the High Inquisitor reappeared, his wounded shoulder hanging limp but his energy weapon raised. The blade, he demanded, approaching cautiously. Give it to me, and your companions may live as servants in the new Aldaria. Flynn struggled to his knees, the sword's glow diminishing as his strength ebbed. Behind Sira, he could see Order forces gradually gaining the upper hand, the Aldarian sentinels being systematically disabled, Soren and one nomad warrior still fighting but surrounded. In that moment of desperation, the sword's voice spoke in Flynn's mind with greater clarity than ever before. The Sky Citadel awaits, Sovereign. The final protocol remains. Understanding flooded Flynn's consciousness. Knowledge of the last, most desperate measure programmed into the Sovereign Blade, meant for circumstances when all other options had failed. A gamble with terrible cost, but perhaps their only hope. Help me up, he whispered to Kalia. She supported him as he painfully regained his feet, facing Sira with the sword held before him. You want Aldarian power? Flynn called to the High Inquisitor. Then witness its full measure. He raised the sword skyward and, drawing on his last reserves of strength, spoke the ancient phrase revealed in his mind. Aldaria Ascendant. Final protocol engage. The sword exploded with light, so intense it turned night to day. Energy coursed from the blade into Flynn's body, filling him with excruciating power that threatened to tear him apart from within. He screamed as knowledge and awareness expanded beyond human limits, his consciousness momentarily touching the dimension where the Sky Citadel had been suspended for centuries. The ground beneath their feet began to tremble. In the distance, a mountain peak that had been unremarkable moments before began to glow with the same blue-white energy as the sword. Fissures appeared in its surface, revealing glimpses of golden architecture within. What have you done? Sira gasped, his face a mask of fear and awe. What was necessary? Flynn managed through gritted teeth, every word an effort as the sword continued channeling power through his overtaxed body. The Sky Citadel returns, but not as the weapon you sought. The mountain was dissolving now, rock and earth falling away to reveal the magnificent structure hidden within. A city of impossible architecture, golden spires and crystal towers emerging as if from another reality. But unlike the pristine citadel of Flynn's visions, this one bore the scars of ancient battle, portions of its structure damaged or missing entirely. As the last of its mass phased fully into reality, a shock wave of energy pulsed outward, washing over the battlefield. Order weapons and vehicles instantly powered down, their modified Aldarian technology responding to the override command embedded in the Awakening Protocol. Flynn fell to his knees again, the sword still blazing in his grip. Blood trickled from his nose and ears, the strain of channeling such power taking its toll on his mortal body. Yet his eyes remained fixed on the distant citadel, now hovering several hundred feet above the wasteland, its damaged structures still magnificent against the night sky. It's beautiful, Kalia whispered beside him, just as the legends described. Damaged, Flynn corrected weakly. Just as we all are. Sira had fallen to his knees as well, but in supplication rather than exhaustion, his eyes fixed on the floating city with fanatical devotion. The prophecy fulfilled. Aldaria reborn. I was right all along. Flynn struggled back to his feet, leaning heavily on Kalia. Not reborn, he countered, awakened to serve a new purpose. He raised the sword one final time, directing its energy not at Sira, but at the citadel itself. By right of blood and bearer of the blade, I command the citadel of Aldaria to open its sanctuary to all who seek shelter, regardless of lineage or faction. The floating city responded immediately, lights flickering to life across its surface as ancient systems reactivated according to the new directive. Several of its lower platforms began to descend toward the ground, forming bridges and access points where once there had been restrictive barriers. Syrah's expression contorted with horror. What are you doing? The sacred city is for the worthy alone. You defile our heritage. I'm correcting a mistake, Flynn replied. Aldaria fell because it became isolated, believing itself superior to all others. I won't repeat that error. Hatred blazed in Syrah's eyes as he raised his energy weapon once more. Then you're no true heir. You are a... His words were cut short as Soren, battered but still fighting, tackled him from behind. The energy weapon discharged harmlessly into the sky as the two men struggled. Go! Soren shouted to Flynn and Kalia. Get to the Citadel. Establish control before the Order regroups. All across the battlefield, the pattern of conflict had shifted. With Order technology disabled and the Aldarian sentinels responding to Flynn's commands, the Sanctuary defenders were rallying. Meanwhile, many of the conscripted soldiers in Syrah's army were throwing down their weapons, staring in wonder at the floating city. Flynn hesitated, unwilling to abandon Soren, but Kalia pulled him urgently toward one of their vehicles. He's right, she insisted. This is our one chance. The Citadel is the key to everything. With a final nod to Soren, Flynn allowed himself to be guided toward the vehicle. As they sped toward the descending platforms of the Sky Citadel, he looked back to see Soren standing triumphant over Syrah's unconscious form, surrounded by nomad warriors who had joined the fight. The journey to the Citadel passed in a blur for Flynn, his consciousness flickering as the sword continued drawing on his life force to maintain the awakening protocol. By the time they reached one of the access platforms, he was barely able to stand, supported entirely by Kalia and a nomad warrior who had accompanied them. The platform recognized the sword immediately, a shimmering barrier dissolving to allow their entrance. Inside, they found corridors of gleaming metal and crystal, illuminated by soft light that seemed to emanate from the surfaces themselves. Despite the signs of ancient battle damage, scorch marks on walls, collapsed sections, exposed circuitry, the majesty of Aldarian architecture was breathtaking. Following the sword's guidance, they made their way to the central command hub, a vast chamber dominated by a crystalline throne atop a raised dais. Arrayed around it were control consoles and holographic displays showing the status of the Citadel systems, most flashing with warning indicators. The Citadel is critically damaged, Kalia observed, examining one of the displays. Many systems are offline or functioning at minimal capacity. Flynn nodded weakly. Enough remains to serve our purpose. He stumbled toward the throne, the sword pulling him forward with almost magnetic force. Flynn, wait, Kalia called anxiously. The strain is killing you. We need to find another way. He shook his head. No time. The awakening is incomplete. Without full activation, the Citadel will destabilize. He reached the throne and turned to face her, his face pale and drawn, but his eyes clear. Help me finish this, Kalia. Then, I'll rest. With her reluctant assistance, Flynn seated himself on the crystal throne. The moment he made contact, the sword in his hand flared brilliantly, and energy conduits throughout the chamber lit up in sequence, power flowing from the throne to the Citadel's core systems. Flynn's body arched in pain as the throne established a direct neural link, the same connection the ancient emperors had used to control the Citadel's vast capabilities. Through the link, he could sense the entirety of the floating city, its damaged sectors, functioning systems, the remnants of its defensive and life support capabilities. More than that, he could sense echoes of its former inhabitants, impressions left in the crystalline architecture of the rulers who had sat upon this throne before him, their pride and folly preserved like insects in amber. The last emperor's madness lingered strongest of all, a poisonous legacy that threatened to overwhelm Flynn's already taxed consciousness. Flynn, Kalia's voice seemed to come from a great distance. Stay with us. Don't lose yourself. With monumental effort, Flynn forced his awareness back to the present, using Kalia's voice as an anchor. Through the neural link, he began redirecting the Citadel's remaining power, prioritizing life support and stabilization systems over weapons and imperial quarters. bringing medical facilities online. He gasped, each word an effort. Opening diplomatic sectors for refugees, diverting power from weapons arrays to agricultural systems. As he spoke, the displays around the chamber updated to reflect his commands, the warning indicators gradually shifting from red to yellow to green as systems realigned to their new priorities. Outside, additional platforms descended from the citadel, creating more access points for those below. Flynn could feel his consciousness beginning to fragment under the strain, the sword drawing more energy than his body could safely provide. The voice of the blade spoke in his mind. Critical power levels. Host system approaching terminal parameters. Just a little longer, Flynn whispered, both to the sword and to himself. With the last of his strength, he issued a final command through the neural link, a broadcast to all functioning communication systems in the wasteland, to all people of the former Aldarian territories. The Sky Citadel has returned not as a seat of power or dominion, but as a sanctuary for all who seek knowledge, healing, and cooperation. The age of emperors is ended. The age of unity begins. As the message transmitted, Flynn slumped in the throne, the sword's glow dimming to a faint pulse. Kaliao rushed to his side, cradling his head as his eyes fluttered closed. Flynn, stay with me. The sword fell from his limp fingers, clattering to the floor beside the throne. For a moment, all was still. Then, faintly, the blade began to glow once more, a soft blue light that enveloped Flynn's unconscious form. Symbiotic preservation protocol engaged. The sword's voice announced, audible now to Kalia as well. Critical biological systems stabilizing. Recovery estimated at 73% probability. Relief washed over Kalia's face as Flynn's breathing steadied, color slowly returning to his ashen features. He'll live, she asked the sword directly. The bearer will recover, the sword confirmed. Though the neural bond with the Citadel has exacted a significant toll, full rehabilitation will require time. Hours later, Flynn awakened in what had once been the Imperial Medical Chamber, now repurposed as a general infirmary. Kalia sat beside his bed, her face lighting up as his eyes opened. Welcome back, she said softly. You had us worried. Flynn attempted to sit up, wincing at the effort. The Citadel? Sierra. The Citadel is stabilizing, Kalia assured him. Basic systems are functioning, and people are already beginning to arrive. Refugees from the battle, then others as word spreads. She smiled. As for Sierra, he's been contained. Soren and the nomad warriors took him prisoner. Many of his followers have surrendered, especially after your broadcast. Flynn relaxed slightly. And the sword? Right here, Kalia indicated the sovereign blade, resting in a specially designed holder beside the bed. Its glow was subdued but steady. It seems to be recovering too, in its own way. Over the following days, as Flynn regained his strength, the true scope of what had been set in motion became clear. The Sky Citadel, while severely damaged from its ancient battle and centuries in stasis, still represented a technological wonder beyond anything the wasteland had seen in generations. Its medical facilities alone were saving lives hourly, treating conditions long considered fatal in the harsh post-collapse world. More significantly, the Citadel's reappearance had shattered the power structure of the wasteland. The Order, without Sierra's leadership and with much of their adapted technology rendered inert by the Citadel's override protocols, had splintered into factions. Many of the rank and file, seeing the truth of Flynn's actions, had abandoned their zealotry to join the growing community forming around the floating city. A week after the awakening, Flynn stood on an outer observation platform, leaning on a railing as he gazed out over the transformed landscape below. Where once there had been only barren wasteland, now a sprawling settlement had begun to form, organized around the Citadel's access points. People from all corners of the former Aldarian territories were arriving daily. Nomads, settlers, even former dust reavers, all drawn by the promise of sanctuary and the possibility of a new beginning. Kalia joined him at the railing, standing close enough that their shoulders touched. The council is ready whenever you are, she said. Representatives from all the major groups have assembled. Flynn nodded, his hand unconsciously moving to the sword at his hip. Though he had recovered physically, the neural bond with the Citadel had changed him in ways he was still discovering. Flashes of ancient knowledge, heightened perception, a deeper connection to the Aldarian technology that surrounded them. "I'm not sure I'm the right person to lead this council," he admitted. "You're exactly the right person," Kalia countered. "Not because you're of royal blood or because you wield a blade, but because you understand the cost of power. You've seen both sides." Flynn considered her words as they made their way to the newly established council chamber. Once the Emperor's private audience hall, now reformatted with a circular table where representatives sat as equals. Soren was there, as were the Nomad clan leaders, settlement representatives, and even a reformed faction of the Order who had rejected Syrah's extremism. As Flynn entered, conversations quieted, all eyes turning to him. The sword at his hip gave a gentle pulse, as if in encouragement.